Hi, I'm Brett Todd. I am the Assistant Residency Director at Beaumont for Emergency Medicine.
And I'm Danielle Turner. I'm the Associate Residency Director at Beaumont.
So my name is Payal Shah. I'm one of the Associate Residency Directors for the Emergency Medicine Residency at Beaumont Health System in Royal Oak. And I truly think that the personal statement that you write for your future residency and career is a special one. For an applicant, it's kind of like that I have arrived moment. And so for me, when I read these personal statements, it gives me an introduction to who I'm about to meet on the interview trail. It also gives me an idea of how well you've sort of thought about your career in emergency medicine. So I look and see, is the personal statement easy to read? Is it concise? Is this person making a good use of my reading time? And do I come away with knowing this applicant just a little bit better? And I think what this does is it opens this sort of comforting door to the interview and gives us a good point to come back to when we actually have a face-to-face interaction.
All right. So when I'm reading a personal statement, I think probably what's most important is for me to be able to kind of understand the journey that this person's taking to go into emergency medicine, but I don't want their entire application reiterated in the personal statement. I want it to be about them and to understand some different aspect, but also to understand what it is that they're hoping to gain from residency and ultimately looking for their future.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I really like to see a theme play out in the essay. We start out at one point, we see where that takes us through the essay, and then it wraps up, so it's a complete picture. Essays that are too choppy seem very boilerplate and don't really work well.
Yep.
Some common mistakes that people make when writing their personal statement. First of all, the obvious things. Grammar and spelling have to be right.
Oh,
so
that's like my like pet peeve.
Right.
If
that's gone wrong, I am going to disregard the personal statement almost immediately. So definitely have 2 or 3 people proofread your personal statement. Essays that are just too long. So if it's going on to page 2, something like this, if it's, print it out would be my recommendation. And if it's filling a full page with this much word verbiage, it's probably too long.
We're just going to lose interest and it's going to be hard to get to the end.
Exactly, yeah. And then not starting strong and not finishing strong. The middle portion is kind of easy to kind of gloss over as a reader. A couple of examples here. Essay number 5 starts with, "I'm an engineer." Okay, that to me grabs
Sketchy,
me.
Yeah,
Exactly. And then it continues that theme and it finishes up with how he or she combined their engineering approach to emergency medicine. So it kind of tied it all together, started strong, finished strong. There's another counterexample, which is from Essay 2, which I think did not start strong. The following 3 statements highlight what I would bring to your emergency medicine residency program and serves as an introduction to who I am.
Yeah, that almost seems like I'd be turned off right away when you started reading that first sentence.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just not drawn into what they're saying. So.
In my application. And this is a really tricky question to ask because I really think every situation is a little bit different. Certainly some weaknesses should be addressed. Others are addressed in other portions of the application. And so including them in your personal statement may just either draw too much attention or don't really emphasize what you should be emphasizing in your personal statement. So these things include things like gap years, academic deficiencies, or even more taboo things like discussing a DUI or maybe a misdemeanor that was had or institutional action. So I think probably what's most important to take from these is you probably should be taking these essays ultimately when they're done to your mentors and advisors and other faculty in the department that or the specialty that you're hoping to match in and have them read them, because that is going to be probably the most important thing to make sure it sort of passes that initial test, that you're not necessarily either highlighting something that was an issue for you too much or that you're able to explain yourself in your essay. I would say probably the number one thing that people may have to address is potential academic deficiencies, and if those are addressed in your dean's letter, then I
Right.
really think that that's probably an adequate place for them to have been discussed, and they don't need to be harped on in your personal statement, because we really want your personal statement to be about you and not necessarily about one hardship that you've had, unless it's really shaped who you are and you don't feel like it's talked about in other portions of your personal statement. Another one that I think often could get discussed is the issue of a gap year or potentially a leave of absence. And I do think it's helpful, if it's not mentioned in other portions of your application, to have some understanding why you might have needed interruption in your training. What I think is much, much harder to discuss is things that are potentially more taboo. But if there's been things like substance abuse or things that have been recent that you really feel deserve a place in your personal statement, I would just make sure that your personal statement is really vetted.
Yeah, all I would add to that is, if you are going to include some reference to something that detracts from your argument for why you belong in a residency, keep it brief.
Yeah.
You can talk about this in the interview process if the interviewers want to address that subject, but your personal statement is to highlight what's best about you and make your argument for why you belong in that residency.
Exactly, and I would tack on to that too, that really, if there is a weakness, that discussing it in a way where you have made change in your own life or made a positive step, I think is a really important point to make sure you're highlighting.
And so I think what I would say is go back to the drawing board and brainstorm some ideas. And I'm going to go through the 5 essays that I was given to look at, but what I would encourage you to keep in mind is maybe to think about some vivid memories of your career in medicine so far. Ask yourself, what do you do well? Make some comparisons to experiences that you've had outside of emergency medicine or outside of medicine in general. When you can't think of anything, go back to honesty and kind of reasoning through why you made the choice of being in emergency medicine. And then also talk about what's non-traditional about you. So if we go through some of these personal statements, when I look at personal statement 1, I thought that this personal statement was a great introduction. I felt like the applicant was saying, hey, listen, I've got a lot and I've done a lot to arrive to the place that I'm in right now in my career. And I think probably the most vivid line in this paragraph is the one where they sort of reflect on a touching memory that they have of their trip to Peru. I can still see the dirt on the faces of all the children we treated in Peru. This really stands out when I read this essay because I feel that that person has this vivid memory that they created during this experience, and it gives it a little bit more of a personal touch. So when you're having trouble sort of coming up with where to start, think back to some of those things that have left a mark in your memory in terms of your career.
So for the very first one, a couple things here. First of all, the length is a little bit long for me.
Yeah.
These are the critical pieces here. The final paragraph here starts out with, emergency medicine is undoubtedly right for me. However, I believe a transitional year could help me prepare for the ED. Don't do that.
No.
Yeah,
No.
that sort of shows a lack of confidence, maybe a lack of commitment to emergency medicine.
For sure.
And confidence and commitment are definitely something that we need to see in a candidate.
Absolutely. I will say one thing I think this candidate did a nice job on is that they had an academic issue with completing one of their entrance exams, the COMLEX, and they did a nice job essentially just making mention of that and kind of what they learned from that. I think that's really important, but keeping it relatively succinct so that it didn't sort of overtake their entire personal statement, and those things are probably explained in better places in other parts of their application.
Right. I really liked how he said what he did to correct that.
Absolutely.
And sought out a mentor, and
Yeah.
that worked well for me.
For sure.
So, okay.
So essay 2, there is a lot of verbiage in this essay.
Right. Very wordy.
Very wordy. And I think it looks like they took a thesaurus and highlighted certain words and then changed them into words that maybe are a little bit less personal than I would have liked. And so I think it's one of those things to make sure that it flows and that it reads well and that it doesn't feel like a mouthful for every sentence.
Yeah, it's hard to read a statement like that and stay engaged with it.
For sure.
What I liked about this personal statement at the very end, they explicitly stated what I am looking for in a residency program is X, Y, and Z. And I think residency programs like to see that. They like to see is this person going to be a good fit with us, and what kind of environment are they looking for? And this person laid that out nicely.
Yeah, they did a nice job there.
Okay.
Two, this is another great tactic to use when you sort of hit a roadblock or you're having writer's block with what to put on paper. Just stop and maybe make a list of, what do I do well? Because this is a great question that I think when you make a list of your personal characteristics that you think help to shape your EM career, you can generate a lot of experiences to pull from your personal statement. So when you read through this personal statement, you know, this person does a great job of saying things like, I pride myself, this is what I do well, I'm a student leader, I'm a patient advocate. And then I think paragraph by paragraph, this person's able to go back and give examples of how they achieve these goals. When I look at essay number 3, so, you know, I really like this one because it's sort of short and concise, and I think that they use some great comparisons. So I can really tell that this person used some of their experiences outside of medicine, and sometimes that's the best way to sort of bring back why you chose emergency medicine. So specifically in this essay, I think the line that I liked the best was, the trauma bay was like an orchestra. Really makes me think that this person understands the team experience that we all go through when caring for patients in the emergency department. And they also talk about how their experiences on sports teams help make them learn how to make quick decisions under pressure. So this is another great tactic that I think people can use when they're having trouble putting on paper what they want us to know about them. You know, recall some of the experiences outside of emergency medicine or medicine in general that sort of reflect why you would do well in the environment that we work in.
So number 3, one thing that I liked is brevity. It's not too long, and
there's white space here.
There's white space,
quite a bit, as opposed to the first 2.
I don't know how short you can go. I mean, I think if there were 2 paragraphs, that's too short.
Yeah, you got it. It's a little bit of a fine line, but I think you can figure that out.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing I liked was, I thought thematically this worked well. You look like an ER doc, it started out with, and then
it's very catchy, yeah.
It was catchy opening line, and then it kind of like continued through about what it means to be an ER doc, and then it kind of finishes up with, and then I thought back about these comments about what I look like an ER doc and what that meant. So I thought that worked really nicely.
Yeah, I liked this personal statement. I will say one of the things that's like totally a pet peeve of mine is when people refer to our specialty as the emergency room. So
Right.
I would be really cautious about that. I don't think I'm alone in that. So, you know, say emergency department, say emergency center, if you're kind of looking for something maybe a little bit less specific or you're not sure. But I would kind of stay away from using the word emergency room. You know, we're a relatively newer specialty, but I think really referring to our specialty as emergency medicine or as an emergency department, I think is really the best.
Yeah, and also another version of that is ER doc.
Yeah.
I would be careful with using that term ER doc. It's very casual and slangy and old school.
I agree. I totally agree.
Yeah.
All right. On the next personal statement, which is personal statement number 4, you know, I think this personal statement read relatively well. I would be careful with using a lot of descriptors when you're describing a patient. Certainly you don't want to get yourself in a HIPAA violation, but more importantly, I think, you know, trying to describe all of the specifics about a resuscitation really isn't necessary to get your point across, and you want to make sure you can use the amount of space that you have to really tell us something specific about yourself.
Right. We've all been in resuscitations. We all know the energy and the stress. So the fact that you went through that, it's, you know, it may be important, but don't belabor it.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And then one thing that was kind of nice here, this person I felt like had a real personal, it just felt very personal and warm, and it had a light touch of humor to it. You know, great advice, Dad, in the first paragraph, which I thought worked well. And you have to be careful with humor.
Sure.
This is not supposed to be a humorous personal statement, but a light touch of humor, if done right, can really work well.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So essay number 4 is a good example of kind of honesty and reasoning. This is important for the applicants, I think, that give us applications that maybe don't reflect that they wanted to do emergency medicine since they were 2 months old. And we get a lot of these. I think when you look at the application as a whole, you start to see that maybe they had other interests early on in their medical career, or maybe they did research in something that wasn't necessarily emergency medicine related. And I think to sort of tie that back, this essay does a good job of talking about all of the things that they did that maybe didn't work out or maybe made them come to the decision that emergency medicine is what they wanted to do. So I think this is a good example of sort of honesty and reasoning when you're sitting down to write your personal statement, and how you sort of came to this place and interviewing for emergency medicine. And then finally, essay number 5. This is probably one of my favorite things that I think applicants can do to create a pretty different type of personal statement. So ask yourself, what makes you different or non-traditional? And everybody probably has something that they can reflect on. These would be examples like big career changes, what your family life may be like, your living circumstances. These are all things that I think sort of help shape who you are and gives us an idea of how you got to emergency medicine. So I think the other advice I would give when I read this personal statement number 5 is this person talks about their engineering career and how it sort of morphed into what they want in emergency medicine. And so non-traditional applicants can really use these things to create sort of a different type of personal statement.
Okay, and then the last one, this would be personal statement number 5, starts out, I think, also really nicely, I am an engineer, period. And it's like, wow, that kind of grabs me. Mm-hmm. And then he or she continues on with this theme of what the engineering mindset is and how it can work really well in the emergency department and for an emergency physician. He just kept it running through the whole way, and I thought that was great.
Yeah, and I would say the other thing that I just kind of noticed in this essay is that they mention another specialty, which I think if done well and explain yourself, especially if you really were between 2 specialties, could be possible and successful. But I think you really have to be careful mentioning other specialties because it just does bring up that idea of where your commitment lies, especially if you're drafting a personal statement and you're sending it to multiple different residency programs or multiple different specialties. I think you really got to be careful what you're putting in that statement.
Yeah, I agree with that because we've all considered other specialties at some point. Right. The one spot I think where it may be useful is if you had a career track, say you were heading towards urology from day 1 and your whole entire CV points to urologic research, etc., mentoring, and then you make a last-minute change.
And then that makes some sense that would sort of play out in your essay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So hopefully that's helpful in what I like to look for when I'm reading these personal statements. Good luck.